I am so pleased to introduce our speaker for today. Kyle Meyaard-Schaap is Executive Director of the Association for a More Just Society, and he leads operations in the United States. He has a BA from Calvin University and an MDiv from Western Theological Seminary, and he is ordained in the Reformed Church in America. I think there's much more I could say. I think I'm going to leave it at that. Welcome. Yep. It's good to have you.
Thank you, Doug. Thanks so much. Gloria, can you hear me okay? Good. All right. Well, thanks for being here, everybody. I'm really pleased for what's to come, for the conversation we're going to have. And I do hope it's that. I hope it's a conversation. I've certainly prepared material to share with you, and I'm eager to do that. And I'm hoping for lots of time at the end for questions, for discussion, to see where that time takes us. Thanks to Doug and the rest of the HASP team for the invitation and for making this time possible. Thanks to Bruce Beltman for 6 months ago, maybe saying, hey, would you want to come teach a HASP class? I'm grateful. I'm grateful to be here. As Doug said, my name is Kyle Meyaard-Schaap, and for about 10 years or so of my professional career, I have been fascinated by the question of what does it mean for followers of Jesus to do justice in the world. That's taken me in a few different professional directions. 2 years ago, it took me to the Association for More Just Society US, and I'm so thrilled that it did. It's an amazing organization that I'm really proud of. I'm really excited to tell you about it, to tell you about the work that we do. And hopefully explore ways that we together as followers of Christ can partner in being more faithful witnesses to God's coming kingdom of justice and peace in the world. So who are we? Who is the Association for More Just Society? Well, at our core, we seek to be brave Christians dedicated to making public systems in Honduras more just, especially for the most vulnerable. I'm going to spend a lot of time on that word just. But for now, I want to focus on those 3 bolded phrases. First, brave Christians. If we were to step outside and walk down 8th Street and stop people on the street and ask them, what word would you use to describe a Christian? What words do you think we would hear? Churchgoer. Okay, what else? Follower of Christ. What else? Thank you. Hypocrite. I often have to ask for the mean ones. That's great. Thanks. Hypocrite. Judgmental. Kind, loving, right? We'd run the gamut. How many of you think we would hear brave? I don't think brave would crack the top 100. But when we read the Old Testament prophets, when we read about Jesus and his disciples, when we read the New Testament epistles, we read about people like Peter and Paul in prison. When we read the stories of the early church martyrs, courage has been a mark of the people of God from the very beginning. And somehow, in the West especially, we've lost that part of our heritage, I would argue. And part of what we are about at the Association for More Just Society is encouraging Christians to recover our call to be brave, to lean into our heritage and recover courage as a core part of what it means to follow Jesus. And part of that following is in public. We try to encourage Christians to recover their calling to be courageous in public. We work to reform public systems in Honduras because we recognize that particularly for those who are most vulnerable, I'm going to combine these two. For those who are most vulnerable, it is the public systems that they depend on most. I'm talking about public education, public hospitals. In Honduras, the health system is nationalized, so there are public hospitals. I'm talking about the police force that the most vulnerable folks in Honduras depend on for their safety. If you have money in Honduras, just like anywhere else, you can hire a private security guard to guard your home. You can live behind a gate. You can go to a private doctor. You can go to a private pharmacy and get medication. You can send your kids to a private school, right? Just like here, if you have money, you can do those things. If you don't, you have one option, and it is the public option, the option offered by the government. We at ASJ are passionate about reforming those systems so that the one option that the most vulnerable in Honduras depend on disproportionately is the best possible option it can be. So that's a little bit about who we are and what we do. And now I want to share a little bit about our structure. So we are a family of organizations. We were founded in 1998 as ASJ Honduras. One of the things I love most about ASJ is that it is an organization by and for Hondurans. It was founded in Honduras by Hondurans, a team of Hondurans and a couple of US expats who have lived in Honduras for 30 years now, who were looking around and saying, there is brokenness here. We have to do something about it. So in 1998, ASJ Honduras was founded. And 2 years later, ASJ US, the office that I lead, was founded in the year 2000 to come alongside and support the work of ASJ Honduras. Not to lead it, not to direct it, not for white Westerners to come down to Honduras and dictate what needs to be done and to diagnose their problem, right? But to come alongside in solidarity and in partnership. And just this year, ASJ Canada, after 10 years of legal fights, received their nonprofit status in Canada. Canadian government is very strict about who they grant nonprofit status to. So we are thrilled about that they are officially now incorporated. And that's who we are. We're a family of organizations dedicated to doing justice, not only in Honduras, but also more and more in the countries where each of us are rooted. I want to show you this picture because I said ASJ is an organization by and for Hondurans, but I want to show you what I mean by that. I love to show this picture, and I want to encourage you to keep this picture in your mind as I share the rest of the presentation, because as I talk about the work that ASJ is doing in Honduras, I don't want you to picture me. I want you to picture these folks. This is our team in Honduras. It's a little bit of an older picture now, so some of the folks have come and gone, but that is our team in Honduras. It's about 60 or 70 professionals, lawyers, psychologists, data analysts, brilliant, dedicated, courageous people who are doing the work of justice day in and day out. So I've talked about justice already a lot, and I want to just lay a little bit of groundwork to help you understand what we mean by justice when we talk about doing justice. Now, there's all kinds of definitions for justice. We could get philosophical, we could get practical. I want to get a little biblical. And I want to share a proverb with you to help set the stage for what we talk about when we talk about justice. Now, we've all heard this proverb, right? If you give a person a fish, they eat for a day. If you teach a person to fish, they eat for a lifetime. This parable, this proverb, is talking about two ways to help people, two ways to come alongside somebody in need. Giving a person a fish is charity. That's one level. And in essence, charity is giving help to those in need, often during periods of crisis and acute need. And I want you to hear me say loudly and clearly, charity is necessary sometimes. I think charity rightly can be critiqued in its application sometimes, but other times charity is really necessary. Victims of the California wildfires last year didn't have time to learn how to build their own house, right? They needed somebody to build a house for them, or they needed a bed that night. They didn't have time to learn how to grow their own food. They needed food that night because they had nowhere to sleep, no food to eat. Charity is necessary to meet acute needs in moments of crisis. And teaching a person to fish, I think we can consider development. We talk about development work as empowering those who are in need to improve their own circumstances. Think about agricultural programs around the world that are working with subsistence farmers to improve their crop yield through different practices, sustainability practices, all kinds of ways that development can improve people's circumstances and equip them to improve their own circumstances. But a question we often like to ask at ASJ is, okay, great. You can give a person a fish if they really need it. And if they don't really need it in that moment, you can teach them to fish. But what if there's a fence around the pond? Or what if there's a factory upstream from the pond where you taught someone to fish that's dumping chemical waste that's making its way into the pond and decimating the fish population? In other words, what if there are structural barriers that are preventing somebody from implementing tools that you're giving them through the work of development? And that's a question of justice. The work of justice is establishing systems of fairness and equity so that everyone can access the resources that they need to thrive. Now, these are the three levels of assistance that we often talk about at ASJ. And I want to say again, there are organizations that do charity work. There are organizations that do development work in Honduras and around the world. We partner with organizations like that in Honduras. We bless that work. We don't say that work is useless, that work is counterproductive. That is okay. Where we believe we are called to work is at this third level, working at the systemic level to make sure that those who are doing development work are able to do it more effectively and to ensure that charity is needed less and less because more and more people have access to the resources that they need. So I said I was going to get biblical. I'm not going to belabor this, but I do want to show you these passages because I think it's important for us to remember just how much the Bible has to say about the work of justice. We could go all kinds of places. Here are some of my favorites. Isaiah, learn to do right, seek justice, defend the oppressed, take up the cause of the fatherless, plead the case of the widow. It's in the Psalms, defend the weak and the fatherless, uphold the cause of the poor and the oppressed. James, I really like this one. James in the New Testament, writing about the Jesus way that is emerging after the death and resurrection of Jesus, saying, suppose a brother or sister is without clothes and daily food. And if one of them says, go, I wish you well, keep warm and well fed, but does nothing about his physical needs, what good is it? And then James has a word for that kind of faith. I wonder if you guys know what word that is. What does he call that kind of faith? Faith without works is dead. It's dead. In other words, the Holy Spirit, which is life, is not in it. This kind of faith is not of the Holy Spirit. Proverbs, like Psalms, the wisdom literature has it. The prophets have it. The Gospels have it. The New Testament has it. We named our second son Amos partly because of this passage. I love it. Amos is telling the people of Israel that their worship services are an abomination to God. This feels pertinent to 21st century Christianity, perhaps. He says, away with your noise. I don't want to hear your praise songs because injustice is reigning in the land. I don't want that. I want justice to roll down like waters and righteousness like an ever-flowing stream. I think we've all been familiar with Micah. Do justice, love kindness, walk humbly with your God. Isaiah similarly ties justice to worship. He says, you're fasting, that's great, but you're fasting and then you're going out and you're oppressing your neighbor. You're not doing what I told you to do. I don't want that kind of fasting. The kind of fasting I want is for you to loose the chains of injustice and untie the cords of the yoke. And Jesus himself, right? Jesus himself made justice a core part of his ministry on earth. In Luke, when he's inaugurating his earthly ministry, Jesus quotes from Isaiah, and he says, the Spirit of the Lord is on me because he has appointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to proclaim freedom for the prisoners and recovery of sight for the blind, to set the oppressed free, to proclaim the year of the Lord's favor. One of the ways I like to talk about this is, I think one of the things Jesus is telling us here and is saying here is, if my ministry on earth that I am inaugurating here, if my ministry does not result in freedom for prisoners, in recovery of sight for the blind, if it doesn't set those who are oppressed free, if it doesn't witness to the year of the Lord's favor, then I will have failed. And I think by extension, we can say, if our ministry in Jesus' name does not result in these things, then in a very real sense and in a real way, we have failed. And in Matthew 22, when a scribe, a teacher of the law, approaches Jesus and asks him, what is the greatest commandment? And we're pretty sure this was a trap. This was meant to be a trap. He was trying to get Jesus to commit when rabbinical schools were divided about how to answer this question, how to organize and taxonomize all the 600 plus laws of the Old Testament to come to Jesus and say, hey, which one of those 600 is the most important, Jesus? We're pretty sure it was a trap. But Jesus answers, he says, love God with everything you've got and love your neighbor as if their current circumstances and future prospects were your own. My paraphrase. Love your neighbor as if their current circumstances and future prospects were your own. And otherwise, love is Jesus' answer. Love God and love others. So when we look at ASJ, when we look at the breadth of biblical witness that flows from the Old Testament through the Gospels into the New Testament, witnessing to God's heart for justice and mercy, witnessing to how justice shapes the coming kingdom of God that we are all witnesses to here and now, again, we feel called to work in spaces of injustice, to witness to God's desire that that injustice would be eradicated. So, how do we do that? It's a great question, and I'm going to share lots of examples today. But first, I want to set a little bit of the foundation. So ASJ's work for justice focuses in a few primary areas. When you talk about the work of justice, when you talk about broken systems, we could go a million different directions, right? Here too, in the United States, when we're talking about systemic reform, working to address broken systems, to bring justice into spaces of injustice, we could go anywhere. This is where ASJ decides to focus. I'm going to share a little bit more deeply in a minute, but essentially, based on the ways that each of these issues drive migration, which is a huge problem, a root cause of a lot of brokenness and injustice in Honduras, because of the ways that these issues in particular drive migration, because of the ways that they drive unemployment, we believe that these are the issues that most affect those who are most vulnerable in Honduras. And that's always our North Star. How do we center those who are most vulnerable and improve these public systems to try to bring about as much justice as possible for those that Jesus told us to put at the center of our ethical concern? The orphan, the widow, the fatherless, those who are vulnerable. Now, how do we do that? This is a little bit about our methodology. I'm going to share this theory, and then I'm going to share 3 examples of what this theory looks like in practice. So for now, here's our theory. This is what we believe about the kind of change we can create and how. So it's a 4-step theory of change, and it starts with research. One of the things ASJ does really well is research. And I think in the United States, it's easy for us to take for granted the dearth of, is dearth a lot or a little? I always mix that word up. It's a little? Okay. What's the opposite then? Like the cornucopia, the breadth, the breadth of research institutions that we have here, right? And not just the research colleges and universities, but the think tanks. There is a ton of good science-based, data-backed research being done here in the United States. And that's not to say we don't struggle with disinformation and with bad data, because we absolutely do. So talk for another time. But we have a lot of institutions doing research in the United States. In Honduras, that is not the case. Essentially, the government is the body with the resources and the ability to conduct research. And I think you can immediately spot the problem there, right? The government is going to have a built-in incentive to release data that makes them look good. There's a huge conflict of interest in only the government doing research and providing data. So one of the holes that ASJ is trying to fill in Honduran society is providing good science-backed data that we can use to drive all the work that we do. So we always try to start with research. We want to identify what is broken and why. If we go back, what is broken in the education system and why? What's broken in the healthcare system and why? Security and justice, policing, what's broken and why? Transparency and democracy, what's broken there and why? So we do research. And then based on our research, we start to get some ideas of what we might want to do to try to improve those systems. And then we take those ideas to other stakeholders. We collaborate. We're always trying to work in coalition and in alliance. We've learned a long time ago at ASJ that you can go fast if you go alone, but you can go further if you go together. So we reach out to educators. We reach out to nurses and doctors organizations. We reach out to all kinds of other stakeholders and say, hey, here's the research we've done. Here's what we know is broken about this system. And here's some initial ideas we have to try to fix it. What do you think? And then they say, no, that's a terrible idea. Let's do this. And they say, no, that's a terrible idea. Let's do this. And together, we refine our ideas. We refine our solutions. And then what we do is together in alliance, we apply pressure. We call it healthy pressure, but it's pressure. We pressure the government, those in power, by releasing our research and our proposed solutions and doing it in really effective, savvy ways. Mass communication, press conferences, earned media, speaking opportunities. I'm always struck by the amount of times ASJ is on the news and in the newspapers in Honduras. If you think about Honduras, it's about the population of Michigan. So we're talking about 10 million people, and the government is just closer in that kind of size population and size country than in the United States. Very hard to get lots of sustained national attention in the United States, but in Honduras, ASJ has figured out a way to hold press conferences and have 10 or 15 news outlets there every time, to be on the news every week, to be approached by newspapers for comment on almost every story. And we're very, very good at it. Communications is a core part of our theory of change because that's how we build healthy pressure. I'm going to share some examples of what that looks like. I want to stop here and I just want to connect 1 and 3 for you because I think there are lots of organizations that do beautiful research, think tanks that spend years on a study. And there might be a press release and a press event where they announce it. It might get 1 or 2 headlines, and then it largely sits on a shelf, collects dust. There are also organizations that are very, very good at being very loud and getting a lot of attention. But then when you ask them for their analysis or their proposed solution, you realize that their analysis is a mile wide and an inch deep. What I love about ASJ is that it marries these two things. It does good, deep research, and then it communicates really effectively about it. So after we do research and we build our alliances, and in our alliance, we go public to create healthy pressure on the government and those in power, then we advocate. We build relationships with these government officials, with these people in power to advocate with decision makers, to advance our proposed solutions. And when it all works together, when the research is solid, when the alliance is powerful, when the healthy pressure is working, it creates a window of opportunity that ASJ and our partners are always ready to jump through to create systemic change that can change the lives of the most vulnerable in Honduras. And I think one of the most important things about this methodology, about this theory of change, is that it's cyclical. We don't just go through these 4 steps and then stop. We don't just say, hey, we had this years-long campaign to improve the public education system, and hey, the government said, yeah, we'll do those things, great. We don't wash our hands and walk away. We say, hey, thanks so much for committing to do those things. We're going to go ahead and monitor that and make sure you're actually doing it. So we go back to research. And that actually happened with the example of extortion recently. Extortion is a huge problem in Honduras. Small businesses, individual families who are approached by gang members and told, you need to pay us this amount every month or something terrible happens to your daughter on the playground next recess. Our research shows that 3 years ago, about 8% of all households were paying extortion. This year, it's up to 11%. That despite the fact that 2 years ago, we did this process and it resulted in the government basically copying and pasting huge portions of our proposed solutions and announcing a plan with funding to address extortion. We didn't celebrate and say, oh, great, they listened to us, they have a plan to address extortion, now we can forget about it. We said, wonderful, thank you for listening to us. Thank you for agreeing to implement all of these steps and for allocating money to it. We're going to monitor it and make sure you're actually doing it. And when we did that, we found that despite the government's rhetoric, they actually implemented only a handful of the points that they announced they were going to implement. They executed only a fraction of the budget, and guess what? Extortion rates are still going up. So that's part of our work too. We don't walk away. We continue to monitor the government and make sure they're doing what they say they will do when they say it. Now, this is just another graphic if it's helpful for you. If you like what I just showed you with the 4 steps and the circle, you can ignore this. But in case you want another visual, this is another way to think about it. Our theory of change here are 4 big buckets that I've talked about with a couple of other secondary buckets that if we had the time, I could go into a little bit more detail. But for our purposes, these are our focus areas. And these are the 4 things we do: research, alliances, communication, advocacy. And you see advocacy and communication are flipped, and that's because it's not always linear, right? We're jumping between things, and it's not always linear. It depends on the situation. And we do all of these things on these areas to create healthy pressure on public institutions to meet the basic needs of citizens. That's what we're trying to do. Meet the basic needs of citizens in a way only the government has the size and the ability to do in a place like Honduras, so that the most vulnerable can enjoy their fundamental rights with efficiency and quality. Efficiency and quality, it's a translation thing. This was written in Spanish. I don't love that language, but whatever. You can see in the top corner too, a little bit of what I said before. At ASJ, we believe these issues on the left-hand side are those that most affect the population, especially those who are poor and vulnerable. They lead to migration, create unemployment, affect the development of the most needy families. So if we can create a public education system, a public health system, a policing and justice system, a democracy, if we can create communities at the local level, if we can create strong, robust economic and financial systems, if we can create an electricity sector that doesn't lose and steal electricity from the population, if we can make sure that climate governance is done in a way that is transparent and effective, we believe that it will lead to lives that are more fulfilling, lives that will thrive for those who are most vulnerable in Honduras. I'm going to skip that one. So that's a little bit of the theory and the groundwork of who we are, what we do in theory. Now I want to share some examples of what this actually looks like in practice so that you can start to get an imagination for the scale of what this work actually looks like. And I hope we'll have time to discuss together not only what this work looks like in Honduras, but man, what would it look like to do this kind of work here in the US? Because that's one of the things ASJ US is about too, is asking that question. How can we take the lessons we're learning from the innovative justice work happening in Honduras being done by our partner and implement it here, translate it here to the US? So education is one example I want to share. When we started working intentionally in the education sector in Honduras, about 2010, and we started with research. And our research told us that between 2002 and 2012, we took a couple of years to do this research, and we went back to 2002 all the way to 2012. We found that kids were getting about 120 days of class. Now that's a problem because Honduran law states that kids should get 200 days of school. They were getting 80 fewer days of school every single year. That's almost 3 months of school that they were missing. And we found that in 2010, there were a whole bunch of teachers on the payroll that were getting a paycheck from the government and weren't actually showing up to class. This was a combination of just plain corruption and graft of, the Secretary of Education putting their nephew on the payroll who lives in Spain and like doesn't do anything. And it's also a product of the fact that there aren't enough teachers in Honduras, and a lot of teachers are stretched between multiple schools. And sometimes they can't get all the way up the mountain to the mountain school because there's been rain and there's a mudslide, right? It's a combination of things. So I don't want you to think that it's just a bunch of teachers who don't want to do the right thing. It's both. But regardless, the effect is the same for the kids. The kids aren't having a teacher in the classroom. And our research shows that the #1 indicator of success for kids in school is having a competent teacher in the classroom every day. So these were major problems that we decided we wanted to address. So we implemented our methodology. We built alliances with other stakeholders interested in education. We held press conferences. We did all kinds of creative things. And between 2013 and 2018, the days of school jumped from 120 to 218, almost 100 more days of school from 2013 to 2018. And the number of ghost teachers, as we coined them, we called them ghost teachers, teachers who should be in the classroom but aren't, fell from 26% to 1%. Huge results that we're really proud of, and I think is a testament to the efficacy of our methodology. But the astute among us might see that date 2018 and think, something big and global happened a couple years later that really affected education. What was it? Yeah. So COVID was a problem everywhere, is a challenge everywhere. It was devastating in Honduras. Here in the US, schools closed in March when there were the shelter in place directives, and most stayed closed through the summer, but then opened in the fall. There were masks. We fought about it. It's a whole thing. I don't want to think about it again, but they were open. Kids were in the classroom. In Honduras, schools were closed for 28 months. 2.5 years when kids didn't get to go to class. And that's in a country where only 30% of students have access to internet. So we're talking about the majority of kids having little to no instruction for 2.5 years. And in 2022, schools finally reopened, but when they did, kids only got 97 days of school. So when you go from 218 days was the average to in 2022, kids are getting 97, it's a big problem. So it was very discouraging for ASJ. We were ready to move on to things like teacher training and textbooks and making sure that, now that kids are actually in the classroom and teachers are there, how do we make sure the quality of education is better? But instead we had to go back and get days of school back where it needs to be. And so we did. This is one of the things that we did as part of our research and our pressure aspect of our work is we recruited 20,000 volunteers. I'm going to say that number again. We recruited 20,000 volunteers, and part of it was because of the alliance we built with World Vision, with Compassion, those other organizations that are doing charity and development work, right? I said we partner with those, we bless them. We're in alliance with them, and we were able to recruit 20,000 volunteers who we call every Friday. and we say, how many days of school did your kid get this week? Did your kid get a lunch every day at school? Or how many days did your kid get a lunch this week? All of it is fed into our data set that then populates this counter. This was a real-time dashboard that is still live now. We're doing this again this year, but this happened last year for the first time. This is a live counter that you could go to anytime, and it updates every week with the number of days of school that kids are getting on average across the country and the number of school lunches that kids are getting. They should get one every single day. And it kind of went viral in the country. News stations picked this up and it became known as School Day Tuesday. Because every Friday we call and we get our data, we spend the whole weekend analyzing the data. And then on Tuesday, we hold a press conference and we release the school day numbers. And like I said, it got a lot of attention. And this guy on the right didn't like it so much. This is the Secretary of Education. This is our executive director in Honduras, my counterpart in Honduras, the executive director of ASJ Honduras. His name is Carlos Hernandez. And that's Daniel Sponda, the Secretary of Education. He didn't like it. So he took to attacking us online, Twitter, on the news stations, calling Carlos names, trying to denigrate his integrity. For months, this went on. And finally, Carlos one day gets a call from Daniel Sponda. And he answers, hi. And Daniel Sponda says, hey, can we meet? And Carlos is like, well, let's do it in public because I don't know what you're capable of. But he does. And that's a quiet moment I like to just pause at in the story. I don't know if I would have said yes. This is a guy who's been attacking me personally for months in public, calling me vile, vicious names. And then he calls me and he says, can we meet? Carlos says yes, without hesitation, because that's what we do. We are always trying to find the best solution possible for, in this case, the kids of Honduras who deserve an education. So we said yes. So they met, and Daniel Sponda told him at that first meeting, he said, you're probably wondering why I called you for a meeting. And he said, it's because every Tuesday, the president of the country, his boss, sees your numbers. She watches the story. She sees your numbers. And every Tuesday after the numbers of days of school are released, I get a phone call or a text where she's asking me, are these numbers true? What are you doing about it? Because it's making me look bad. And that's exactly what we're about, right? That's what we're trying to do. We're trying to create that kind of pressure so that people in power feel that it is in their best interest to act so that those numbers get better, and in turn, they look better, right? That's what we want. We don't want the government to look bad. We want them to look good because that means that they're doing their job and that they're providing services for the country. We will work with any government from any party as long as it means justice for the most vulnerable. So they actually began to build a pretty beautiful relationship together. Daniel Sponda has had Carlos over for dinner to his house. His wife has cooked meals for them. They've actually become friends. And Daniel Sponda, we've realized, is one of the people in government who actually wants to do a good job. He wants to address these problems. And so we have come up with a lot of solutions together. I want to share just a couple of them. So out of these meetings in 2023 is when these meetings were happening after that first disastrous year of 97 days of school in 2022. All through 2023, we met, we came up with plans together, and in 2024, we implemented some of them. And the results were that in 2024, classes started on the first day of school when they were supposed to. This might sound like a simple thing, but the year before, school started 5 weeks late. Kids lost 25 days of school right off the bat. So just setting the school calendar and sticking to it was huge. Kids started school in the first year. This is Daniel Sponda, and this is the president of the country, Xiomara Castro. She was there to inaugurate the school year. She said, our schools are open, send your kids, we're ready for them. President doesn't usually do that. That was a big deal. And you can see she did that. Politicians don't do anything unless they think it's good for them, right? She did that because she thought it was a winning issue for her. She wanted to be seen as providing education for the country's kids. And last year, the school year ended with 185 out of 200 days of school. So up from 97. Again, almost 100 more days of class last year because of the work that we put in with the Secretary of Education to ensure it. And school lunches, similarly in 2023, school lunches didn't get to schools. The ingredients didn't get there until March 20, 6 weeks, 7 weeks after school started. And if you think about it from the perspective of a poor family, sometimes that school lunch is one of the main reasons you send your kid to school, is because you know they're going to get a meal at school. And if you're hearing from people in your village, yeah, school lunches still aren't there, they still aren't there, the incentive to send your kids diminishes. And then when school lunches finally do show up, the kid has missed 6 or 7 weeks of school. They don't want to go, they're behind. So having school lunches there on time is actually really, really important for enrollment and making sure that families are motivated to send their kids. We believe, keep doing that, we believe that 2024 was the first time ever. I'll say it again. We believe last year was the first time ever that school lunches were ready at schools on the first day of school. Now, a lot of that is because of the budgeting process for the country. It's logistics. Nobody had spent time solving the problem of how to get ingredients there ahead of time before schools open. That's something we worked with the Secretary of Education to address. And because of that, school lunches were there right away. And they got almost all, they got 155 school lunches out of the 185 days of class. So again, not perfect, not where it needs to be, but huge, huge progress. And I do want to put this in context. We're not talking about 200 kids. We're not talking about 2,000 kids at a private Christian school that's been set up by missionaries. Again, beautiful thing, we bless that. We're talking about 2 million kids. There are 2 million kids in the Honduran public school system. This is the scale that we're talking about. When we are able to build relationships with government officials, to create a school calendar that ensures that kids start class on time and that kids get lunches, we're talking about affecting the lives of 2 million kids. It's one of the things I love most about ASJ is we're working at the structural societal level and the impact is just massive. So that was last year. You might ask, what about this year, 2025? Well, very similar story. There's Daniel Sponda again in his sunglasses and like a chef's shirt. I don't know what look he's going for there, but anyway, that's the president again at the first day of school. They had a big ceremony. She loved it. That is ingredients showing up to schools before the first day of school again. So school lunches were there again on time. And this is a picture of us facilitating the signing of an agreement to print and distribute new textbooks to students in Honduras for the first time in 7 years. Kids in Honduras haven't gotten new textbooks in 7 years. A lot of the workbooks have been filled up for years. They're crossing out the answers and writing them again. They're sharing them. They're all tattered. I mean, I've been to these classrooms. And this is an important priority for us. And this signature assured the printing of the first 10% of textbooks to go to 10% of schools. So it's a start. We need to keep going. But part of this agreement too was that the government would prioritize the poorest school districts for these new textbooks. So that based on means testing, the kids that are going to get the first new textbooks in 7 years are going to be the poorest and most vulnerable kids. Because that doesn't usually happen, right? It's not usually how it goes. You want the kids of the wealthier families to get it because they're the ones who donate to your campaign. They're the ones who vote most consistently. No, we said that's not what we're about. We're about the poor and the vulnerable. So that's an example of how that methodology I walked through of research, collaboration, pressure, advocacy can lead to real results for the whole country. I want to share another example of how that methodology can lead to real meaningful results, and it's in the area of security and justice. So I don't know if you remember, but a lot of people don't tend to think about Honduras I get that, unless you have an existing connection to Honduras. But I think a lot of the US heard about Honduras 15 years or so ago for a pretty inauspicious reason. And it's because in 2010, 2011, 2012, Honduras was the murder capital of the world. I don't know if you remember hearing about this, but more murders per capita were happening in Honduras every year than in Iraq, in Syria, in Libya, anywhere else. The most murders per capita anywhere. And a lot of it had to do with drug trafficking routes, drugs that were coming from Colombia and other areas of South America being delivered to market here in the US to meet our demands for drugs, were traveling through Honduras and leading to lots and lots of violence, mostly for innocent people. We conducted our research. We said, what's broken and why? We learned the homicide rate is atrocious. And we learned that people don't trust the police to report it. There's a problem in lots of places around the world, including here in the US. Communities don't always trust the police who are meant to serve and protect them. The people who witness crimes and want to report it could never be sure if the police were trustworthy or if the police were on the take for the gang that they were accusing of this murder, right? And then they would hear a knock at the door in the middle of the night and that police officer would come and disappear them because they reported that this murder occurred. And police officers could never be sure if they could trust individuals either for the same reason. It reminds me a little bit of how communism eroded social fiber and public trust by recruiting people to report and inform on their neighbors, right? Nobody could be sure of who to trust. That was the situation in Honduras with the murder rate. So we undertook several projects around this. Just the one that I want to highlight is we mounted a pressure campaign calling on the president to appoint a commission to purge the national police force. This was a big swing. We took a big swing. The amount of political capital it would take for a president to sign off on a national police purge was massive. And after 3 years of pressure in alliance with all of our partners calling for this, we eventually got the president in 2016 to say yes. He appointed a commission, a 6-person commission, to purge and transform the police force. And this commission was composed of 2 ASJ staff members. This is Carlos Hernandez, who I just introduced you to before, our executive director in Honduras, and 2 members of ASJ's board. So of the 6 members, 4 of them were affiliated with ASJ in some way. I think that gives you a sense of the kind of influence and impact that ASJ has in Honduras. And one of the first things that this commission did, after they reviewed the dossiers on all of the police members, the police force, they started with the top brass. They started with the chiefs of police. A lot of police purges have happened in the world, and a lot of times when they go wrong, it's because they don't go high enough. They purge some of the lower level police officers, but they don't go after the generals, the chiefs of police. This purge started at the top. And the very first press conference that this commission had was after a days-long meeting. They came out, they didn't talk to the president, they didn't tell anyone. They called a press conference, they came out, and they said, all 9 chiefs of police in the country are fired. Because that was their authority. They could fire whoever they wanted. Needless to say, the very next day, all 9 chiefs of police were in the president's office, the president of the country's office, saying, you have to disband this commission. You have to give us our jobs back. This is ridiculous. The president said, yesterday I could have done that, but now this thing has a life of its own. Because that announcement was carried on national television. The president could not be seen to be undermining the independence of this commission. The kind of courage it took for the commission to come out and say that, with the amount of power that the chiefs of police had, still astounds me. So you can see that here. Generals is what Hondurans call their chiefs of police. There were 9 chiefs of police around the country. All 9 of them were fired. Every single commissioner at the next level down was fired. Sub-commissioners, about a quarter were fired. Superintendents, again, about a quarter. You can see here, this is Spanish, but I'll translate. You can see here of about 14,000 police that were evaluated, almost half of them were purged, were fired. This was a deep, significant purge of the police. And what we did in tandem with this is we worked with the government and with the Swiss government to develop a brand new training program, to revamp the entire training program for new cadets, to build a new training facility, which is there now, and you can go visit if you ever come to Honduras to see our work. And since 2019, when the purge ended, over 10,000 police cadets have gone through that training program and have joined the force. Over a third of them are women. That was another priority for the commission, was to diversify the police force more. And the police force has been entirely remade. It's not perfect, of course, right? But really, really significant accomplishment in 3 years and then the 6 years since. And I want to just show you that same data point. So I showed you 2011, murder rate was the highest in the world, the highest in the world. Our police purge ran from 2016 to 2019. New cadets have been trained from 2019 until 2025. Today, 10,000 of them going through this training. And here's what the murder rate has done. It started up here, and now last year was at 31, and in 2024 is about 25 per 100,000. Again, it's not a direct causation, right? You can see here, the purge started here, and the murder rate was already dropping. There's all kinds of reasons why the murder rate drops. But we believe that the police purge is a significant reason why the murder rate has continued to drop and why we believe it will continue to drop. So that's my second example of a big thing that ASJ has done by implementing our methodology of research, collaboration, pressure, and advocacy. And the third and the final example I want to share, and then I'll conclude and we can have some conversation, is around democracy and transparency. You'll remember that that was another core issue for us. And I think this year more than ever, this has taken on an urgency that we maybe have never seen before. This year in Honduras is an election year. In 1 month, Hondurans are going to go to their polls and elect their next president. These are the three main candidates here. This is Rixi Moncada. She is from the current ruling government. This is Tito Asfura. He's from the Nationalist Party, which is essentially their Republican Party, their conservative legacy party. And this is Nasrallah is his name, and he is from the Liberal Party, their kind of legacy progressive party. In a month, people in Honduras are going to go to the polls, and we're concerned. This government is a new party to rule. They've never ruled before. They came to power for the first time in 2021. And they came with a lot of promises, and they've been very disappointing in a lot of ways. One of the ways they've been disappointing is in their friendliness with authoritarian governments like Cuba and Venezuela and China. The current president, who I showed some pictures of, Xiomara Castro, was the first world leader to congratulate Nicolas Maduro on his sham stolen re-election a couple years ago. So that gives you an insight into who their friends are globally. And there's been a lot of evidence that I don't really have time to go into right now, a lot of evidence that they're trying to emulate a lot of the same repressive tactics of those governments. So a couple of years ago, this was becoming more and more apparent. And so ASJ did what we do. We reached out, and you can see there, I've been trying to put the different pieces of our methodology on these slides to show you what this looks like in practice. We began reaching out to members of civil society in about 2023. We reached out to the Catholic Church, the Protestant churches, to universities, to private business, to journalists, women's associations and nonprofits, youth nonprofits, And we've built what we call the Network to Defend Democracy, which is over 20 NGOs from all sectors of society that have been meeting regularly for the last 2 years, and since last year have been publicly releasing data and information about the state of democracy and about the actions of this government that are undermining democracy in Honduras. One of the platforms for sharing that research is called the Democracy Observatory. I'd love to walk you through this website and show you, and maybe in the Q&A, we might have time for me to do that. But it's dozens of data points that we are tracking and updating in real time to show how is this government shrinking civic spaces. In other words, how is this government making it harder for organizations like ASJ and others to do our work, to hold them accountable? How are they chilling public speech? One of the things that we track is attacks on Twitter. Like how many government accounts are attacking nonprofits and NGOs on Twitter and on social media. And all of that is housed here, and that's all public. So together in this network, we are researching and we're making that research public. Another action that we took in August that I'm really proud of and that I want to share is in August, there was a prayer walk for peace and democracy that was held in Honduras. And it came out of the primary elections that happened this previous March in preparation for the general election in November. The primary elections were chaos. The ruling party, I think, proved all of our worst fears correct. The administration was a sham. There were ballots that never made it to their polling locations, ballots that made it there hours after they should have, the locations should have been open. There were rented buses with ballots in them, just sitting on the side of the road, not knowing where they're supposed to take the ballots to and from, ballots being carried on donkey. Like it was incredible. And so out of that, several things came, but this one in particular that I want to show you. Out of that came a call from the Archbishop of Tegucigalpa, the Catholic leader of the country, and the evangelical leader of the largest group of evangelicals in the country. These were two men who didn't know each other's names 2 years ago. Religious prejudice in Honduras is very real, and animosity, distrust between Catholics and evangelicals is very strong. They were both invited to ASJ's office 2 years ago as part of the Network to Defend Democracy meetings, and it was there that they met each other for the first time. They shook each other's hands, they learned each other's name, and some of those old religious prejudices began to give way to trust and affection. So that 2 years after that first meeting, after the primary elections went poorly this past year, they came together and they said, we have to do something, and it has to be us. The church in Honduras is the most trusted institution by a long shot in the country. It has to be us. So the two of them together put out a joint call to everyone in Honduras to walk the streets on August 16, to walk, to pray, to demonstrate that they want a free and fair election and a responsive democracy. They hope maybe 20,000 people would show up, was their goal. And in Tegucigalpa, the capital alone, 230,000 people walked. This picture is from San Pedro Sula. It's the second city of Honduras where 80 to 100,000 people walked. And there were dozens of other walks in smaller parts of Honduras as well. So we know that well over 300,000, maybe 400,000 people walked on that day. There's a data point that social scientists point to, maybe you've heard it, that says that for any mass movement to really take root in a society, you need to mobilize 3.5% of the population in this kind of activity. The No Kings March last Saturday mobilized about 7 million. It wasn't quite the 12 million that we would need to hit that 3.5%. Remember I told you Honduras has a population of about 10 million and 400,000 people showed up. That's almost 5% of the population came out for this walk. They smashed that benchmark. And this is the picture that I love the most. So it's grainy, it's not professionally done, which I think makes it even more powerful. It's a screenshot from the news that day. And it is Pastor Geraldo here on the left, the evangelical leader, embracing the Archbishop of Tegucigalpa. And he's crying. He's crying into his chest, the chest of a man that he didn't know, he didn't want to know, he didn't trust 2 years before, embracing him like a brother because they had done this together. They had done it despite death threats. They got death threats from inside the government. We traced them. We know it came from the government. 9 different times, government officials tried to get them to call this walk off, and they didn't. But this is what's possible when groups like ASJ can bring leaders together who would not otherwise be brought together, can cast a vision for what can be, and for leaders who are courageous enough and have the hope that's necessary to do these kinds of big things. And the last thing I want to share about what we're doing around democracy and transparency is, in addition to that prayer walk, we are planning election observing for this election in November. I'm not sure if many of you followed the election in Venezuela that happened a couple of years ago, or in Guatemala a couple of years ago. Both of those elections had really robust civil society election monitoring built around it. We're using the same methodology. Essentially, we want to have election observers, trained citizen election observers, in a statistically representative sampling of polling locations across the country. We're working with statisticians to figure out what do these locations need to be. These observers are going to be in the polling location before they are open, all day that they're open, and after they close, recording everything they see. And most importantly, what they're going to do at the end of the night is they're going to take a picture of the acta, is what it's called. It's a readout of all of the votes from that polling location. In Honduras, and in a lot of countries, election observers, polling observers have access to this readout. So we're training them, make sure that the election workers let you see this and take a picture of it. Take a picture of it and send it to the centralized location. It's likely going to be ASJ's office. We're doing this as part of the Network to Defend Democracy, but ASJ is driving it. Send it via text, probably Signal, something secure, to ASJ's office, where we're going to have researchers compiling this, so that we can hopefully release results ahead of the government. Before the government can falsely claim victory, we want to be able to announce results that are statistically representative of the country and can reasonably be thought to represent the actual vote outcome of the populace. This is a methodology. It's often called quick count. It does have a long academic name that I can't remember right now. But this is a methodology that's been used in over 170 elections in over 50 countries. And it's the reason why the world knows that Nicolas Maduro lost his election in Venezuela by a count of 2-1. It's because we literally have the readouts. And it's why the government in Guatemala, who was trending in a very similar direction as the government in Honduras right now, was not able to steal their election a couple of years ago because election observers did the same thing, proved that they had lost. The ruling party tried for about a week in Guatemala to hold on to power, was ultimately not powerful enough to do that, and ceded power to the opposition, which has implemented really important election reform laws since to try to prevent that from happening again. We often talk about Honduras being in this inflection point. Geographically, Honduras sits between Venezuela to the south and Guatemala right on its border to the north. And it feels like symbolically, Honduras is right in the middle as well. And Honduras could go in one of 2 directions. We could go the way of Venezuela, where a strongman falsely claims victory, consolidates his power, and democracy is severely diminished. Or we could go the way of Guatemala, where citizens rose up and the government was not powerful enough to resist that. We believe this government in Honduras is not nearly as powerful as Nicolas Maduro in Venezuela. They would likely cede power to the opposition party if they lost, which is what all the polls are saying is going to happen. They're losing by a lot. But it's going to take us proving that they lost for them to do it. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to recruit 10,000 election observers. We've already recruited 7,000, and we're very optimistic we'll get to 10. Several dozen of us are coming from the US and Canada as well to be international election observers there. So we're very excited about that and hopeful that it will result in election results that reflect the will of the people. So I want to wrap up here and then leave time for questions, but I just want to end on a couple of key learnings. And this isn't exhaustive, but as I was preparing this, these were the key learnings that rose to the surface for me, that I think ASJ has learned over the 27 years of work that we've been doing this. This is something one of our co-founders likes to say, justice work is hard, but it's not too hard. I like this because I think a lot of times, a lot of us can feel discouraged that the work of justice is long. Sometimes it feels like 2 steps forward, 1 step back. Sometimes it feels like 1 step forward, 6 steps back. And a lot of times that can lead to discouragement, to cynicism, to pessimism, and to ultimately to inaction, which is what injustice thrives on. Injustice thrives on inaction, right? The status quo thrives on inaction. What is that quote? Evil needs nothing more than for good men to do nothing, something like that. And so what I like to say is, yeah, it is hard, but it's not too hard. And I think we just saw some examples of what can actually happen when we do commit ourselves to the deep, hard, long work of justice. We have also found that courage is contagious, going all the way back to brave Christians as part of our calling. Courage is contagious. We heard this from the members of the Network to Defend Democracy, that when they eventually agreed to go public as a network, which was about a year ago, we heard that the organizations, when they were deciding whether or not to put their name to the Network to Defend Democracy, to be a part of the press conference, we heard that what inspired them and gave them hope was seeing ASJ continuing to be brave and to stand up, to hold our press conferences, to put ourselves on the front line. It gives people courage when they see other people being courageous. And they said, because you guys are doing that, we feel brave enough to come and stand next to you. Courage is contagious. And when we're courageous, people see it, it's inspiring, and they want to be a part of it. I kind of touched on this in number 1 already, but systemic change is achievable. It is possible to affect change for 2 million kids in school in Honduras. It is possible to safeguard a national election in Honduras and make sure it's not stolen, but that the will of the people is achieved. I guess I'll check back in with you guys in a month to see if that actually is achievable, but I'm hopeful. I believe we're going to do that. Systemic change is hard, it's long, but it is possible. And leadership is local. Going back to my point earlier about how ASJ is an organization by and for Hondurans. All of the work that I've described is led by Hondurans. All of it is led by local leadership that knows their country, is invested in the future of their country, and so knows what's best for their country and is motivated to do what's best for their country. We often hear from people, well, how can we do this in the US? And maybe you'll ask that question and we can talk about it. How do we do this in the US? One of my first answers is we need local leadership to commit to it. We can't just transplant this. We often have people around the world wanting us to come teach our methodology to them, and we're happy to. But then when it actually comes to implementation, it requires deep commitment from local people in those places for 27 plus years, like ASJ has been. So really quickly, a couple of ways that you can get involved. This is our website. You can sign up for updates to our newsletter. I'll let you take a picture of that. I know some people are doing that. You can sign up for our newsletter. There's a donate button on the website. There's events that are happening all the time. Lots of great information that you can learn about. And this is kind of the entry point, is signing up for our updates there. If you're on social media, you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram. I just gave you lots of great updates, but you don't have to wait for me to do another HASP class to learn what's the latest. We update our social media often, and that's where you're going to get the best updates on what we're up to. We have a webinar coming up next week where we're going to go deeper into the election that's coming up in November. We're going to have some of our folks from ASJ Honduras sharing about what they're preparing for, what are they concerned about, what are they hopeful about, how can we as US citizens participate and be in solidarity with Honduras as they go to vote and hopefully safeguard their democracy. We also have a Holland event coming up. One of the things I love about ASJ US is we have a community of 1,000+ people around the country who come to events every year that we put on. And we're going to do an event right here in Holland in March of 2026. If you sign up for our newsletter and updates, you will get lots and lots of information about that in the months to come, but we would love to see you there to hear the latest and to be a part of that. So those are just a couple of suggestions. Again, hopefully you guys will get this presentation or the recording at least. So maybe you can go back and scan these QR codes and whatnot if you didn't get a chance to do that. But with that, I want to stop talking and I want to hear what you all have to say. Thank you so much.
We have a question from Jennifer online, referring back to the police purge. She said, was there retribution against the members of the commission and also towards the president?
Absolutely, yes. So this was a very dangerous time in the history of Honduras, or sorry, the history of ASJ. This is where I talk about the need for courage and why the work that ASJ does is so brave. Members of the Police Purge Commission needed 24/7 bodyguards. One of the members, he was a member of our board and a pastor, was a part of this. There was one night he was out with his wife at a restaurant and a car pulled up, guys jumped out and just started shooting. And his bodyguard was killed. Him and his wife fled to the United States and they might still be here. Our executive director at ASJ Honduras, Carlos, who was a part of that, also needed protection. He would get basically ransom style notes slipped under his door at night with threats, pictures of his car, proving that people knew who he was and how he got around. So yeah, very, very troubling, very dangerous. Thankfully, well, I guess there were lives lost. The bodyguard lost his leg. But no other members of the commission. But yes, very dangerous. Yeah, Eileen.
A lot of, excuse me, a lot of what I've heard kind of in my back of my mind says this is going on here.
Yeah.
Which is frightening. But does ASJ have election observers in the United States? Do you do that same thing here?
We do not yet. I think it is a wonderful question of whether that is something that we can learn from ASJ Honduras and implement here. I think one thing to remember is the civil society space in Honduras is much less dense than it is here. So when you think about the United States, I mean, even last Saturday with the No Kings March in Grand Rapids, where I live, there were two competing marches in Grand Rapids. I don't know if you heard about this, in Grand Rapids, because two activist groups could not agree to partner together because one group supports Israel and one group supports Palestine. Right, so like we couldn't just all be pro-democracy for a day. We had to divide on our our very important issues. We had to divide on our very important issues. So there are lots of groups in the U.S. that do election monitoring and election observing. It's very ad hoc. There's no centralized organization that's bringing them all together under a united methodology like we're doing. As far as I know, the quick count methodology has not been implemented in the United States. The irony is this methodology was developed by the United States. So it was developed with funding from the State Department, with the National Democratic Institute here in Washington, D.C. It's a methodology that the US has exported to the world, and now we are in need of it, I would argue. So it's a wonderful question. It's a question we're asking ourselves. And I think right now, ASJ US doesn't have the power or the bandwidth to be able to do that beyond partnering with other organizations that might be able to do it. So I think where ASJ US can add value is in the collaboration piece of ASJ Honduras' methodology. We are great networkers. ASJ US is a great networker. I'm a great networker. I have a lot of contacts with national organizations across the country. And something I would love to do is bring this example to those national organizations and say, hey, how can we do this? How can we learn from this? And I don't know what it would look like here in the US, but I would love to see a more robust, focused campaign around election observing here in the US, learned from what's happening in Honduras and other places. Yeah. Yes.
The League of Women Voters would be a good partner
Wonderful.
organization.
Okay.
We also have a comment from online. Can you put the QR codes back up?
Yeah. Those? Okay. Yep.
Yeah, I have a couple of questions,
Great.
if that's okay.
Yeah.
One is, was ASJ first founded in Honduras?
Yes.
Ah,
So
okay.
ASJ was founded in 1998 by a group of Hondurans and 2 US expats. One was a professor at Calvin, although that came later. They were essentially missionaries with what was then the Christian Reformed World Relief Committee, now World Renew. They were there doing relief and development work, like I shared at the beginning. And they, along with the friends they were making in Honduras, were recognizing the development work they were trying to do kept being undermined by the deeper systemic problems that were present. So just quickly, an example. They were working with farmers to increase their yields with new farming techniques. But many of the farmers did not have legal title to their land. They just had ancestral claims to the land because the government did not have an efficient process or system for titling land. So what would happen to these farmers is land speculators would come in, they would buy up the land for pennies on the dollar from corrupt government officials and then kick farmers off their land. So here they are trying to teach farmers to farm better on their land while the farmers are being kicked off their land. So one of the first things ASJ did was they worked on land titling for farmers, and they got over 1,000 farmers titles to their land. So that's, I think, an example of how charity, development, and justice work together, the interplay there, and why ASJ and its founding came to understand that working at that level of justice was what we wanted to do to work.
Wonderful work. The other question I have is about the impact of neighboring nations.
Yeah.
You know, you mentioned Guatemala and Venezuela. And can you speak a little bit about what kind of tangible impacts from neighboring nations have on Honduras?
Sure. Yeah, so Honduras is kind of right smack dab in the middle of Central America. It borders Guatemala to the north, El Salvador to the northwest, and Nicaragua to the south. I don't know if you follow much of the political reality in Central America right now, but Nicaragua has essentially been a dictatorship for decades. Daniel Ortega was a Sandinista, a revolutionary who, when he got a taste for power, liked it and never left. He's been there since the 80s. El Salvador is going in a very troubling direction with Nayib Bukele, the president, the cool dictator he calls himself, with his mega prison that houses, over 10,000 citizens that he has caught up in his dragnet campaign to root out gang violence. You can sleep on the streets of El Salvador now. Like, people love him because he has turned a very violent country into a very safe country, but at what cost, right? 10,000 citizens have been put in prison with no due process. And this is where a lot of the migrants that have been picked up here are being sent as well to the prison in El Salvador. So Honduras is surrounded by countries where the rule of law is very weak, where it's very easy for them to learn lessons, for the government to learn lessons of what does it mean to chip away at the constitutional rights of our citizens? What does it mean to actually put this into practice? I would say Honduras, in terms of migration, is in that northern triangle of Honduras, Guatemala, El Salvador, where a lot of migration was happening during the first Trump presidency. They do not see a lot of migration from other countries coming north, except Venezuela. Honduras has its own migrant crisis, and it's Venezuelans who have fled. And many of them on their way out of Venezuela stop in the countries along the way, and many of them have stopped in Honduras. And I will say Honduran people, as a people, are incredibly kind and open-hearted and genuine. And they've been very welcoming to Venezuelans, but just like any population, with that kind of stress goes on for too long, we're going to start to see it spill over somehow. And so we haven't seen yet the impact of the Venezuelan migrant influx, but I think we will. So those are just a couple examples. Is that helpful? Is that what you were looking for? Okay.
Kyle, I'm not sure the best way to ask this question, so here goes. If I were an American citizen, and I am, and heard about a well-funded organization in Honduras that was seeking to influence public policy in the U.S., I'm not sure how I would feel about Honduras.
Yeah, sure. Meaning, as a citizen, you would say, why is this Honduran organization trying to influence U.S.
Like
policy?
stay out of our business.
Okay, sure. Great question. And I think that's one of the reasons why ASJ US has always been trying to figure that question out. I took over as executive director 2 years ago, and I came from a background of advocacy. I was working in climate justice advocacy here in the US with Christians in particular. So that's my background, it's my passion, and it's something I want to help ASJ US grow in. And I'm learning that it's very difficult. It's very difficult to figure out what is the value add that we bring to advocacy conversations here in the US. I think one of the answers is we bring the on-the-ground knowledge of what's happening in Honduras, which gives us unique, maybe not unique, but unusual insight into things like migration, what migration means on a personal human level, how it impacts people, and how certain policy proposals would impact real people. But you're right. I think we want to be very careful to avoid the implication that it's somehow Honduras trying to influence the US, or we want to be careful of mission drift as well, because we exist to be in solidarity with ASJ Honduras. So I don't want ASJ US to all of a sudden become vocal on all kinds of advocacy issues here in the US that have no connection to Honduras, right? That wouldn't be faithful to who we are and what we're about. So I'll just be honest and I'll tell you, it feels like a little bit of a puzzle that we're trying to figure out. For now, we're moving forward in our advocacy work by making sure that the advocacy we engage in is very clearly connected to the country of Honduras for now. That if we're engaging in advocacy and building relationships with government officials here in the US, we want it to be to advance policy proposals that impact Honduras specifically. In the future, I can see a possibility where, like I said, we are trying to implement some of the methodology that ASJ Honduras is doing in a US context. But I think that's down the road. And I'll give you one example of what it could look like too. So several years ago, we built a relationship with a nonprofit in Chicago that was working on very similar violence prevention work that ASJ Honduras was working on. We had lots of information sharing sessions, a lot of meetings between us. The executive director of that nonprofit came down to Honduras to see the work. Eventually, that executive director believed that his calling was outside of that nonprofit. He left, studied the methodology even more of ASJ Honduras, and just this year launched a new nonprofit in Chicago called A More Just Chicago. So he is using our methodology. He's even using some of our branding. And to me, it's a really exciting experiment in what does it look like for local leadership? Again, leadership is local. What does it look like for local leadership in a community that's about the size of Honduras? I mean, greater Chicago, 10 million people, about the same size of Honduras. What does it look like to implement a similar strategy with local leadership to address locally felt needs? So the first thing the first thing A More Just Chicago is working on is to get a city charter passed. Chicago doesn't have a city charter. And they believe that that is the root of some of the problems that they see in Chicago. So that's a felt need they've identified as local leadership, and they are driving that forward using the methodology that I laid out of research, collaboration, alliance building, pressure, and advocacy. And we'll see what happens. But I'm excited by that, and I hope that I hope that ASJ US can maybe be an incubator where we can incubate ideas like that and replicate that in other cities around the country. But I'm not sure ASJ US as an organization is ever going to be a nationally focused organization here in the US like ASJ Honduras. I think our role is much more to share information, to do advocacy when it makes sense for Honduras, and to encourage and incubate ideas like A More Just Chicago around.
What do you think?
I just wondered what kind of drives the poverty in Honduras, or what makes it so difficult to
Yeah. It's a great question. A lot of things. I don't think there's even a handful of answers. It's a confluence of all kinds of factors. I think part of it is the history of its development. So Honduras was colonized by the Spanish, along with a lot of the rest of Central and South America. And that meant a lot of the resources and the power were held by a very small minority for a very long time. And then even more recently, there's an important story when it comes to the history of Honduras that relates to the United Fruit Company. Essentially, an entrepreneur from the US came to Honduras and realized that exporting bananas, he figured out a way to get bananas to market in the US without spoiling. It's one of the first ones to do it. And he went to Honduras and he bought up just gobs and gobs and gobs of land with the support of the US government that sent him paramilitary forces to help clear the land. And so he owned a huge portion of the most productive land in Honduras for a long, long time, which turned into the United Fruit Corporation. And so just for so much of Honduras's history, it's been a history of exploitation, of colonization, of corporations coming in and extracting, and so little of the money actually going to the rest of the country and the population. So that's part of it, is the history of its development. Another part is when a country develops that way, it doesn't have an opportunity to build robust political or economic systems and institutions. So the institutions in Honduras are very weak. We're seeing that now with the election. I mean, a lot of us here in the United States, and rightly so, are concerned about our own election integrity. I would say it's nothing compared to the concerns of a country like Honduras. Just the ability for corrupt officials to corrupt the process is so much easier. There's so many fewer checks and balances, so many fewer safeguards in place. So just the underdeveloped institutions in Honduras lead to corruption taking root much more easily. Corruption's a problem everywhere, including here. But we at least have 250 years of institutions, legal, political institutions that can somewhat mitigate that. In a country like Honduras, they don't have that. And so corruption is another cause, I would say, that allows just massive amounts of national resources and wealth to be transferred from the people to the ruling elite. And then, when institutions aren't strong, then the very things we're trying to work on, like education, isn't strong. And when you don't have a strong education system, it's really hard to develop a citizenry that is going to innovate and produce more wealth. Private investment is very weak because corruption is so strong. Companies don't want to go into Honduras and invest because they're not confident they'll get a return or that that money won't be stolen. So it's so many factors that compound each other. And there's no silver bullet answer and there's no silver bullet solution. We believe working on these issues are some of the best ways to try to address some of those root causes, but the root causes are many and they're deep. I hope that was helpful.
Could you also speak about like the drug trafficking? Is it mainly drugs trafficking through Honduras?
Yeah.
Or are a lot of people involved there?
Yeah, so a lot of it is drug transit. It's drugs moving from the countries of origin in South America, Colombia, and other places in South America, largely making their way to the United States. When I learned some of this history, it was a real reckoning for me to realize that the suffering being brought upon people in Honduras and a lot of other countries is in a real sense the product of the United States' demand for illegal drugs, right? So, drug use is not a big problem in Honduras. It's not the public health crisis it is here, certainly. So, the market in Honduras for drugs is very small. So the incentive is not to bring drugs to Honduras and sell it. The incentive is to bring drugs through Honduras to the United States. And that leads to a lot of infighting among the narco trafficking gangs that are involved in that work. They're trying to carve out their own supply routes. Other gangs are trying to cut into those supply routes so that they can have more of a share of the drugs that are traveling through. It just leads to a lot of violence and a lot of people get caught up in it. And so yes, the drug trafficking is the largest problem in Honduras, not the drug use. And it's being trafficked here to the United States.
I think we're out of time. I'm going to have to say, this is it.
Yep, I'll stick around. I'll stick
Okay,
around.
thank you so much for coming. You are a terrific advocate. This
Thank you. They